Welcome to Reframe Your Mindset for Success. With me today is Gary Cookson. How are you, Gary?
I'm all right, thank you, Paul. Yes, thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you on. What are you up to this week?
Well, it's a 4-day week for me, and it's something that I've been thinking about quite a lot recently. I've decided that I'm going to go 4 days a week every week from now on. I did 5 days a week last week, and bad things happened, and I've decided I can't do it anymore. So, start of a new regime for me. But later on today, I'm heading into Liverpool, not far from you, and I'm delivering a face-to-face event. I don't do many of those anymore. It'll be only the second time I've done it in 2 and a bit years. So I'm into Liverpool later on today. And then later on this week, it's my youngest son's birthday. And it'll be the first time he's had a proper birthday because COVID over the last couple of years. There were restrictions the last 2 years when he had a birthday. So it's his first real proper birthday this week.
That's right. It's been the same for our little one. Connor. He's literally missed so many birthday parties because of the last few
Yeah.
years. So exactly the same thing. So a busy week then.
Yes, it is for me. Yes, but I was glad to have the day off yesterday.
Great stuff. And I think your idea for 4-day working weeks, I think that's definitely the way forward for us all.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. I mean, I'll talk a bit more about that and why as we get through this. But I think there's a lot of companies doing it now, and I was weighing it up with my wife, and we thought the benefits outweighed any potential disadvantages that it might well bring. So it's going to give me a spare day every week. I've just got to decide what I do with it.
Sounds brilliant. Sounds brilliant. So, as you know, the podcast, Gary, we always start with your story. So, it's over to you in however many words and however you want to tell it.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Well, the way I introduce myself to people when I first meet them is to say that I'm a father of four and a husband of one, and in my spare time, I run my own business. But I couldn't have done that without the way I've organised my working week, what I call hybrid working. Managing my well-being and achieving work-life balance is tricky, but I couldn't have done it without hybrid working. And if you think about it, the 40-hour a week, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday working week in the office is based on the premise that whoever's doing that, they have somebody else to do the cooking, the cleaning, the washing, the childcare. It's an outdated principle. You aren't meant to be able to do all that and work 40 hours a week. There was one year in my life when, just because of the ages that my four kids were at, they went to four different educational establishments just for one year, and the school run twice a day. It was a nightmare, Paul. You just can't work all the time in the office, 9 to 5, and have a commute and do all that. You need flexible working arrangements, hybrid working. And it
Yeah.
comes in loads of pluses and loads of minuses as well. But it kept me engaged, kept me committed, kept me performing for my various organizations until I worked in a job where I couldn't do it anymore. And this was the big defining moment in my career. I moved to a new job as a senior HR professional, director level role in a really big organization. And it was my own fault. I was seduced by the title, the salary, the package,
Yeah.
didn't really do what you call due diligence on what the role really meant for me and my family. And the location was further than I'd ever commuted to before. It wasn't impossible, but it was complicated as a journey. It involved three different forms of transport or one very long, costly car journey. I didn't like either of them. It would have been manageable if I could have done it maybe 2 or 3 days a week and done the balance at home. But this organization didn't allow you to do that, didn't have the technology to do it. You could only do this job 9 to 5 in one office at one desk. You couldn't even access your emails remotely. So when I was on the train or something, or on the ferry across the Mersey, I couldn't even
No.
read and reply to emails. Once I had a telephone meeting. Imagine that in this day and age of video meetings on the phone. It went in my diary for 4:30 on a Friday afternoon with an executive director. Now, at that point, I would normally have been on the train home. So I said to them, it's only a telephone meeting. I'll do it from the train. And they said, no, you won't. You'll do it at your desk on your landline, and then you'll go home. Now, this wasn't too many years ago, and it sounds like it should have come straight out of the 1980s, but actually, it's only 5 years ago.
Oh wow.
Once, yeah, I know, it's strange to think. Once I was really ill and I couldn't face a long commute into the office, but I thought, well, I can work from home in my pajamas. So I did that. I did offline work with no system access, and I got grilled next day back in work, grilled. What work have you done? Why did you choose to work at home? How unwell were you really? And after that, my working times and locations, I saw them appear in my manager's Outlook calendar. They were set for me. And then it got worse than that. My wife got pregnant with our fourth child, and a pregnancy is always got the same. In the first trimester, she's really ill. She can't cook hot food because it makes her sick. She can't do school runs because she needs to be near a toilet. So I needed to do more of both, at least for a while. But I was told no. I was a senior leader. I needed to set an example that kind of pressure came with the job. So I used my mum to do some school runs. But during this time, my mum was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And a couple of years later, she died from that. But this is the early stages. She was having chemotherapy and she couldn't do school runs on the weeks that she was having chemo. So we had nobody. And I asked again at work if I could temporarily work from home or at least vary my hours. And I was told no. And I don't know how we did it, but we managed one day at a time. There was another time that a meeting went in my diary for 9:30 in the morning, but it was on a day when I had to do the school run. I had no one else to do it. And I was getting into work on public transport and I knew it was going to get me there at 9:40, 10 minutes late for this meeting. So I told the chair of the meeting, I'm going to be 10 minutes late. And they said, fine. And I was 10 minutes late. But later on that day, my manager gave me a bollocking for being 10 minutes late, said that I needed to organize my life so that I could get into work for whenever it was needed. So I was furious, I was angry. And you can imagine this, Paul. I'd leave the house before anybody else was awake. I'd have made breakfast for them, left it on the table, and I'd leave before they got up. I'd get to work angry and I'd stay angry all day. And I made really bad decisions as a result. I'd get home, because my wife couldn't cook hot food. They'd had a pretty shit evening meal without me, and everyone was angry with me. I lost weight, my performance suffered, my mental health suffered, all because I couldn't control the way I worked, what I call hybrid working. And I spoke at a conference, it was the CIPD conference about 5 years ago. And my talk was on flexible working and how HR professionals need to do their bit and lead by example. And I listened to myself preaching and I thought, you're a hypocrite, Gary. You know what to do, but you're not doing it yourself. So by the end of the next day, I'd left my job, I'd set up my own company, and I started hybrid working again and putting my life back together. And that doesn't mean life's smooth sailing even now, but I make loads of mistakes, but they're my mistakes and I own them and I perform and I'm engaged and I'm committed and I work when and where I need to and with who I want to. And that's my story of how I've got to where I am today.
Right. Okay. So quite an intensive corporate career then. That really has made you realise that the flexible working is the way forward. And that was before the pandemic started.
Was before the pandemic. Yes, it was. It was 2017. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know we were talking prior to this started, and you're about to release a book on remote working, hybrid working. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I can, yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm trying to plug the book as much as I can, and people might get sick of me mentioning it. But the book is called HR for Hybrid Working. It's published on the 3rd of June, and it's available from all good bookstores. But it's all about how we reimagine the world of work, and in particular, how we lead, manage, and communicate with people if they're working remotely in a hybrid way or even face to face. What needs to change in the way we deliver people practices, all aspects of the employee life cycle. And that's what the book is about. And it draws on my research, but also my experiences of doing that over a near 20-year period. It isn't something that came new to me when the pandemic hit. I'd been doing it for a while. And you can see from my story, it's something that enabled me to be the father and the husband and the professional that I wanted to be until it all came crashing down. So I bring all those experiences into the book.
Brilliant. And on the basis of you leaving the corporate world and setting up your own business, how does that relate to the book? And you've got hybrid working practices, but what is it you actually do now?
Well, I help individuals, teams, and organizations to become better at what matters to them. And that's obviously a very broad church, but most of what I do is working with leaders and working with people teams, HR, L&D, OD teams, to help them improve the working lives of people in the organization and improve what work actually is. So a lot of that focus in the last couple of years has been about how do we work remotely? And as we emerge from the worst of the pandemic, it's about how do we managed to go into a hybrid environment without making it too easy to just go back to the old ways of working. So that's my focus at the moment.
Yeah. And how well do you think organizations are getting on at the moment with, I mean, obviously it's been accelerated through the pandemic. We kind of gone remote, and then we've now got to this, not all our organizations, by the way, because some organizations have pulled the staff straight back into work, and they're not doing it. They're not playing ball with it. But I know most seem to be coming to some kind of hybrid arrangement. So how do you see that? What's the landscape? Could you give us a bit of a picture?
Well, the landscape's populated by extremes. If you read the media, you see the Jacob Rees-Mosses of this world leaving notes on civil servants' desks saying, come back to the office, with a thinly veiled "or else" in there as well. And you see things like that in the media, and the reaction to that in the media from everybody I talk to as well is strongly negative. And things like that are driven by a little bit of fear and a little bit of culture, a little bit of command and control, but also the need to make the best use of the corporate environment, which in many cases is already built and paid for. And if people aren't going to be there, it's sat largely wasted. And it's understandable. But just because it works for the people at the top of the organization doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody else in the organization. Everybody's circumstances are different. And when you do see the other extreme coming through, I saw something in the news last week about Airbnb, for example, who were going to the other extreme and saying people can work from anywhere, anytime, and as long as work gets done, they're basically not that bothered. Now, that is a nice principle to have, but even that's fraught with risks. There is zero control on that, and it sounds really good, but it might be going too far in putting power into the hands of the employees. And I think there's a better way, a middle way. And in my book, I try to talk about, let's think of work in different ways, and let's look at what work is being done, not just when and where, but with the type of work, and then work out a middle ground somehow.
Okay. Yeah. No. It makes complete sense. And I'm looking forward. When's it out, the book, by the way?
3rd of June.
3rd of June. Right. Okay. I'm looking forward to reading that. Well, as you know, Gary, the podcast, it's reframe your mindset. So it is all about mindset. And if you think about mindset and ways of working, it all interconnects a little bit as well. But from your perspective, how important is mindset in what you do?
It's really important, Paul. If I'm typical, I mean, you've just listened to my story. If I'm typical, then there's going to be millions of people like me whose performance, engagement, commitment is impacted by hybrid working or a lack of it. The pandemic forced loads of people to work remotely and now in a hybrid way, but it was a false situation. It wasn't what could have been. It was what it had to be. It's why I wrote the book. We've got to reframe our mindsets about what work is if we're going to avoid slipping back into old ways of working. And we're going to miss out, if that happens, on what remote and hybrid working can really bring people. So I try to help organizations to do that by sharing my mindset that work is defined by the task itself and how the task needs to be done, not by arbitrary days of the week splits or policies or even individual circumstances. It's much more complex than that. So I try to share my thinking and my mindset around what work is.
Oh, that makes complete sense. And if you were to then go on and describe your mindset, then how would you describe it?
Well, I think I've hinted at it in some of the previous answers, particularly the story. But I think we have to see work as a really fluid concept that can and does change, and therefore the workplaces and workspaces that we have need to similarly change. Now, that's often dictated by individual circumstances, and rightly so. But the nature of work needs to be flexible. And if we have a fixed mindset about all of this, it's too rigid, too outdated. We've got to be more flexible in the way we think about work. Now, I wasn't always like that, and I haven't always experienced that. And I've described one of the defining events in my journey already. But my mindset is about being flexible and not having a rigid, fixed approach to what work is and where work needs to take place, or indeed when.
Yeah, no, do you know what? It makes complete sense. I mean, I've found, and especially since the pandemic, it really has taught us that you can more or less work from anywhere, anytime, any place, but it does depend on what you're doing. So that needs to be thought through, as you're saying. So on the basis of your mindset, your story, if we looked at practical tips then around your mindset and remote working, which is what we're talking about, what practical tips have you got?
I think it's about values. I think we need to ask ourselves what matters to us. So, to
Right.
anyone listening to this, what matters to you? What drives your behavior? What are the things maybe that you hold dear in life, and to a degree that you hold dear in work too? How do you want to be seen by others as behaving? And is that the same as the things that you do when no one is looking? Because they should be. So I
Yeah.
think answering those types of questions helps people to develop their mindset. So ask themselves those questions. Other questions like, what would you quit a job over? What would you fall out with your best friend over? What would cause you to complain to an organization? What would make you pick a fight with a complete stranger? Those might be your values, and they shape your mindset. So when I do coaching work, which I do with leaders a lot, I get them to answer those types of questions, to get them to explore and develop their mindset, because it helps them to understand what really matters to them, and that is your mindset.
That's brilliant. They're great questions, very thought provoking as well. So yeah, that's really good advice. So on the basis of developing your mindset, who's actually helped you along the way?
I think we have to talk about my parents here, Paul,
Yeah,
particularly my mum. Now, my mum, who's not been with us now for a couple of years, but she was a never-ending source of wisdom and advice to me when I was younger. When in her later years, I think we both figured out we were a bit too similar to each other, and we clashed a lot in the later years. But in my formative years, up until the point that I left home in my early 20s, she gave me so much advice, and I still find myself using it. I'll often have little mini conversations with her in my head, and I can hear her almost talking to me, and I'll say things and I can hear them, almost these things in her voice. She used to tell me lots of different things that helped me develop my mindset.
yeah,
One thing that she would often say to me is, it's just a phase. And she would say that to me whenever I was going through a tricky time. That could be with school or with friends or with family or anything at all. When I was going through a tricky time, and when you're in that kind of the wallowing period in any tricky time, you do tend to think as if it won't end.
yeah, yeah,
But when you look back, it always does. There's no set time frame on it, but everything moves on and nothing lasts forever. So she would help me to reframe things. When I was really down in the dumps about things, she would say, remember, it's just a phase.
just a
Might
phase.
last a while, but it's just a phase. Things will move on, things will get better. And that helped me to really think about when I was at my lowest, that I wouldn't always be at my lowest, that I would get better at some point. So I often remember that. I often say that to myself. She also taught me very much the principle of saving for the future, or preparing for the future as well. And I don't mean a kind of a doomsday prepper type scenario, but she would always help me to think about where I want to be in later life, and work backwards from that. So if I want to retire early, and I do, and who wouldn't, what do I need to do along the way to make that happen? What are the key decisions that I need to make, whether that's saving money or putting into a pension, or making life choices? She would always help me to think through, well, where's that going to lead you? Where will that take you in
Yeah,
maybe even decades times? So she was a big long-term thinker, was my mum, and I often think in those terms as well. Where will this decision lead to in 10, even 20 years time? Other things she would say to me that I often repeat to myself. She always emphasized the importance of preparation and being fully prepared for anything over following up. So she wasn't a big one for sweeping up behind herself, and nor am I, but she was a big one for going into situations fully prepared for what might happen.
yeah,
So
yeah,
if you have a choice between preparing for something, a meeting, a decision, an important event, or sweeping up behind yourself afterwards,
yeah,
she would always go with the former. She would always go with the preparation. And she said preparation beats almost anything. Another thing she would do, and there's a lot that as I'm thinking of this, I'm remembering loads more things that she would tell me. She was good at visualizing goals, and that's something I use quite a lot in my coaching as
yeah,
well. She would, and I don't know how, because she wasn't particularly sporty herself, but she would focus on sports people, whether that's at the Olympics or things like that. And she would look at what the gold medal winners were doing, and she'd read about them, she'd study them, and she'd then share what she'd learned with me. And a lot of it was about visualization, visualizing yourself achieving your goals and achieving what you need to be. And she taught me how to do that. And she taught me quite a lot about stuff like that. She's very much an optimist about, if you think for things, if you prepare for things, if you plan for things, then they're much more likely to come your way. So that was the kinds of advice that she would share with me. So she's probably been the most formative influence on me, I would say.
And you know what a fantastic influence, you know, to have such, you know, a positive, optimistic outlook that you've been more or less coached by your mother there, rather than do you know what I mean? It's like we all get brought up with being coached.
Yeah, looking back, neither of us would have used that label, I think, at the time. But looking back, you're right.
Brilliant. Some great examples that you shared there. And I know, you know, my dad passed away however many years back, and he always used to say to me to reframe my mindset. And similar to the advice you were given about it's just a phase. And the phrase was, you know, is it really that important? And when you sat down sometimes and thought about it, it really wasn't. So, you know, similar type of advice, but they're fantastic tips to share. So on the basis of, you know, your escapades, your adventures and travels and corporate world and in life, have you got any funny stories that you'd share with the listeners?
I could go on all day with these. So I'll tell you a few, and you just stop me when you think is the right time.
Okay.
I'll do these in chronological order, I think, because it's kind of easier for me to remember them. Some funny stories of things that have happened to me at work. One was the guy who brought his snake to work, and I was the HR manager at an organization, and I got a call from the finance manager who said, "Oh, you need to come over here right now because Sam's brought his snake to work and he's frightening people with it, and you need to come and sort it out." And I said, "Well, no, because you're his manager, you sort it out." And he said, no, this is an HR issue, you need to come. So I wandered over to the finance office, and there is Sam sat at his desk with a cardboard box, and in this cardboard box is his pet snake, and he'd been taking it out of the box and waving it in people's faces to frighten them. So I said, "Sam, this snake's got to go." And he refused. He said, "Well, I'm not breaking any rule. You show me the line in my contract that says no snakes. You show me the policy that says anywhere no snakes." And he was confident that he'd looked at these things and there was no such line, and therefore he wasn't breaking any rules. And he'd got me there. I didn't have a snake policy or a snake clause in the contract. But what we have in employment law in this country is a duty of care to provide a safe and healthy working environment. And it means that we have an implied duty to look after people in the workplace. And you don't expect to come to work and be frightened by a venomous reptile. You just don't expect that to happen. You don't need to write that kind of stuff down to actually rely on common sense in the employment relationship. So I told him all of this, said, "Sam, if this snake stays, I'm not fulfilling my duty of care to everybody else in the office. So it's got to go." And he grumbled a bit and he said, "Okay, I'll get rid of the snake, but answer me this." And he said, "Last week in the office next door, Jane Smith, who's off on maternity leave, she brought her newborn baby in to show people. And she waved that in my face, and I was frightened by a baby. What's the difference in a baby and a snake?" And I thought about this for 3, maybe 4 seconds, and I just said, "Shut the fuck up, Sam, and get the snake out of here." So there's one. I'll tell you one other work story, and then I'll tell you one more about life, I think, which explains what I do. The other work story, I was HR manager in a call center, and when you ring up call centers, there's often that phrase that you hear: "Calls are recorded for monitoring purposes." And they are, but only a very small percentage ever get listened to, something like 1% of calls. So purely by random, we got this one inbound call. And I should say at this point that what we were doing in the call center, we were selling commercial repairs, going around repairing shops and things like that when they needed repairs. That gives you context for what this call is going to be about. So this inbound call from a male customer, or he said he was a customer, he asked for one of our staff by name. He wanted to speak to Anthony. Can I get through to Anthony, please? So he's put through to Anthony, and we listened to the call, and the call went something like this. Oh, hi, Anthony. I'd like to book your wife, please. And there was a bit of a conversation that was a bit like, I'd like her to do these things to me. I want to meet her at this place and time. I'm willing to pay this amount of money. I want her to wear these items of clothing. And there was a bit of conversation where they firmed up the finer details of this transaction, and then they hung up. And we picked ourselves up off the floor, having listened to this. And then we wondered, what's Anthony done next? So we checked his call logs, and his next call, still using our 0800 free phone number, was to his wife.
No way.
So we listened to this, and their conversation went a bit like this. So guess what, love? I've got you some work. You need to meet Joe Bloggs at this place and time, wear these items of clothing, do these things to him, and then he's going to give you this money. And on the way home, get something in from the supermarket. And then they hung up. And that they've clearly got a very interesting husband-wife dynamic going on at that point. So we picked ourselves up off the floor for a second time, and we got the police involved, as you clearly would hear. There's clearly some criminal activity here, but the criminal law is different than employment law. The police do their thing. We can do ours. We had him on something really, really simple. He was misusing company equipment. He was running a business on using our equipment on our time. We didn't really need to make a moral judgment about what he was doing. He could have been selling stuff on eBay, but in actual fact, he was pimping out his wife. It didn't matter what he was doing. So we dismissed him on those grounds. And one of the bits of mitigation that he offered was that we didn't pay him enough, so he needed a second income, and that was one of his defences, which we didn't have much time for. So those are the two work ones. And I think my third and final story to finish with is one that kind of encapsulates a little bit of what I do and how I do it. My eldest daughter now, she's 17 and learning to drive, but when she was 3, she asked me what I did at work. And my role then was head of HR, and it's difficult to try and explain HR to an adult, let alone to a 3-year-old child, and I struggled. And the best definition I came up with was that my job was to help people feel happy at work. And if I'm honest with you, Paul, I've not come up with anything better in the 14 years since, because there's something about that. Because if people are happy, they're much more likely to perform. She was quite satisfied with this. Then she went off and came back a few minutes later with some paints and some paintbrushes, and she wanted to paint with me because she said that's what makes her feel happy. And she thought then, and still thinks now, that my job involves getting people to paint in the workplace because that's what would make people feel happy in the workplace. And I haven't bothered correcting her.
What a great metaphor, though. For
it is.
What you
do. It describes what I do. But it has downsides. So I'll finish with this one. Last year, I was having some work done in my house. We were having a garage conversion, and we had some plasterers in, and they were plastering the ceilings and the walls, getting it ready to turn into a bedroom. And the main plasterer comes over to me and he says, "Oh, what do you do at work, mate?" And I said, I pulled myself up to my full height and I said, "I'm in human resources." And I expected him to take a step back in amazement. And he said, "Never heard of it. What's that?" And I thought about this and I thought, well, he's self-employed, so he wouldn't have ever come into contact with anybody in this line of work. So I'm going to have to explain it to him in ways he'd understand. So I told him what I told my 3-year-old daughter. I said, well, my job is to make people feel happy in the workplace. And he looked me up and down and he sniffed and he went, "Sounds shit." And I said, "You what?" He said, "It sounds shit, that does. Can you make me a cup of tea? That's going to make me feel happy." And I thought about that. I thought, if it makes him feel happy, if it makes him do better or faster plastering, then I'll make him a cup of tea. So I made him a cup of tea and left him to get on with his job. And ultimately, that's a microcosm of what I do at work. It's whatever helps people to feel better about their job, whatever matters to them, that's what we need to do. And that's my mindset as well.
Brilliant. Some great stories there, Gary. So thanks for sharing. So coming to a conclusion now, we could talk all day, and I could listen to your stories all day. If you were to give that last bit of advice to the listeners around mindset, what would it be?
I go back, Paul, I think, to some of the things I said earlier on. Don't be too rigid in your mindset. The title of this podcast is Reframe Your Mindset, which of course implies that you should and you can up from time to time. And that's something I'd reinforce here. Be flexible in the way you approach your work, your life. Don't be too rigid in how you approach these things, because that way trouble lies. And that's my final piece of advice.
Brilliant, brilliant. And once again, when's the book out, Gary?
3rd of June.
3rd of June. Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for coming on. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great having you on today.
Okay, lovely. Thank you for having me.